He threw himself into the bullet's path without hesitation, saving her life in a single breathless second. And in that moment, the world realized he wasn't just a canine officer. He was something much more. When the traps closed around them, when the people sworn to protect became the ones dealing death, it wasn't a badge that saved them. It was loyalty, it was instinct sharpened by survival. This isn't just a story about danger or betrayal. It's about a bond that not even fear could break. A dog who smelled the lies long before the masks slipped, and chose to fight when everyone else froze. If you've ever believed that heroes come in unexpected forms, you're in the right place. Hit like, subscribe if you feel the heartbeat of this story the way we do, and tell us in the comments where are you watching from, and which moment made you believe that some heroes wear fur, not armor. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, throwing a cold, clinical pallor over the sterile corridors of Briarwood General Hospital. The ICU was unnervingly quiet, save for the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors and the mechanical hiss of ventilators. Officer Naomi Brooks lay still, her deep brown skin pale under the white hospital sheets, a stark contrast to the vibrant, fearless woman she had been just days ago. Her left shoulder was heavily bandaged, the result of a gunshot wound sustained during a chaotic bust at Westbridge International Airport. By her bedside, tethered only by a thin nylon leash, sat Blaze, a towering black and tan German shepherd whose amber eyes never left her face. His body was taut, every muscle coiled tight, his massive paws planted firmly on the tiled floor. Nurses and doctors moved around them, their steps light, their voices hushed. To them, Blaze was just another canine grieving his partner, clinging to hope the way only dogs knew how. But Blaze was more than that. He was trained to see what others couldn't, to feel danger before it ever arrived, and right now his instincts were screaming. At first, Blaze had been silent, save for the occasional low whine when Naomi's vitals dipped too low. But an hour ago, something changed. A man in hospital scrubs, with neatly combed hair and a laminated badge that read, Officer Daniel Reed, Naomi's temporary handler and longtime colleague, had to grip the leash with both hands to keep Blaze from lunging. "Easy, buddy," Daniel muttered under his breath, trying to soothe the agitated dog. "She's in good hands." Blaze didn't believe it. His nostrils flared wide, capturing every particle of scent that drifted from Dr. Mason's clothing. There it was again, that sharp, acrid odor, metallic and wrong, clinging to the doctor like a second skin. It was the scent Blaze knew intimately, one he had smelled just seconds before the firefight erupted at the airport. A chemical tang that screamed of danger, of sabotage, of death. Dr. Mason barely glanced at Blaze, but when he did, his smile faltered for just a heartbeat, and his hand hesitated over Naomi's IV line. It was enough. Blaze stiffened, a warning rumble vibrating through his chest. Daniel noticed the exchange and frowned, sensing something off but unable to put it into words. After all, Mason's credentials checked out. He was listed as Naomi's primary attending physician after the critical surgery that saved her life. Paperwork was airtight, so why did it feel like the air in the room got colder every time the man walked in? The evening wore on. Blaze didn't relax. His eyes tracked every move Mason made, and every few minutes, he would pull violently toward the left wall of Naomi's ICU room, specifically, toward the gleaming metal vent embedded in the plaster. Daniel chalked it up to stress at first. Blaze missed Naomi. Maybe he was disoriented, confused, grieving in his own canine way, but when Blaze started clawing at the vent with desperate, furious determination, gouging deep scratches into the drywall with his nails, Daniel's gut twisted. He yanked the leash back, trying to stop him, but Blaze whined, then gave a short, sharp bark, his trained alert signal. One of the nurses, a petite woman with curly hair tucked into a tight bun, glanced over nervously. Is he supposed to do that?" she whispered. Daniel shook his head slowly. "No," he said, heart pounding. "No, he's not." At that moment, Dr. Olivia Reyes approached, holding a tablet, her expression curious but composed. "That's not normal canine behavior," she observed, tilting her head toward Blaze. "He's tracking." "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But he's not just anxious. He's trying to tell us something." Together they approached the vent. Daniel crouched down, Blaze practically vibrating with tension beside him. Daniel leaned in, sniffing cautiously, but to his human senses there was nothing unusual. No gas leaks, no burning smells, no chemical tang. Yet Blaze's behavior grew increasingly frantic, his nose pressed flat against the cold steel, his nails scratching at the seams with almost surgical precision. Dr. Reyes frowned and crouched beside them, tapping at her tablet to access the ICU maintenance records. "We've had reports lately," she murmured. "Small equipment malfunctions, weird system errors. Could be nothing, or could be the start of something worse." Blaze gave a short, urgent bark again. Daniel straightened up, his mind racing. His training screamed at him not to jump to conclusions, but his instincts, honed over 15 years on the force, told him Blaze was right. Something was wrong in this room. Maybe not something they could see, maybe something they were breathing. He glanced at Naomi, pale and still on the bed. The monitors beeped steadily for now, but if Blaze was picking up the same scent from the airport attack, the same chemical marker that prefaced an explosion, they were all sitting ducks. "Get maintenance up here," Daniel said quietly. "And security, now." Dr. Reyes nodded briskly, already punching in numbers on her phone. Blaze gave one last angry swipe at the wall before sitting back on his haunches, his body stiff with anticipation. His amber eyes locked onto Daniel's, transmitting a silent message the man understood with chilling clarity. They were running out of time. In a hallway just beyond the ICU, unseen by any of them, Dr. Mason watched through the observation window. His hand tightened around the strap of the bag slung over his shoulder, and his lips pressed into a thin, hard line. Plans had been set, contingencies had been prepared. But he hadn't accounted for one thing: the dog. He turned away quickly, melting into the flow of hospital staff, but not before Blaze caught a last whiff of that poisonous scent trailing behind him, like a shadow. Blaze growled low, vibrating with frustration at the glass separating him from the threat. Naomi stirred weakly in her sleep, her fingers twitching, as if sensing Blaze's distress even from the edges of unconsciousness. The night at Briarwood General was only just beginning, but already unseen currents of betrayal and danger were swirling faster than anyone could stop. Blaze didn't need words to know the truth. Naomi was still in danger, and he was the only one who could save her. The tension in ICU Unit 4 remained thick enough to taste, a low-grade hum of unease hanging over everything as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Blaze has not budged from his spot beside Naomi's bed, his body rigid, his eyes flickering between the door and the small ventilation system embedded into the wall like a sentinel standing guard. Daniel Reed stood nearby, one hand resting on his holstered sidearm, the other casually tapping against the corner of Naomi's medical chart. Something about tonight gnawed at his gut, a sensation not easily dismissed after a career built on following instincts sharpened in the line of fire. In the adjacent nurse's station, Dr. Olivia Reyes leaned closer to her tablet, frowning at the digital chart scrolling in front of her. She wasn't supposed to be here. Her shift had technically ended 4 hours ago, but watching Blaze's unnatural behavior had left her uneasy, unable to leave the hospital without confirming for herself that Officer Naomi Brooks was truly safe. Now, reviewing Naomi's electronic medical orders, Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. Something was wrong, very wrong. The medication dosages listed for Naomi didn't match her current condition. High-dose sedatives, vasodilators typically reserved for cardiac patients teetering on the edge of failure, these weren't merely aggressive, they were dangerous, particularly for a patient already recovering from blood loss and organ shock. Yet every order bore the unmistakable digital signature of Dr. Eric Mason. Not a forged approximation, not a crude hack. A perfect signature matching the ones recorded during Mason's onboarding process. Olivia's fingers trembled slightly as she scrolled further, her medical brain racing. Could Mason have changed protocols based on Naomi's moment-to-moment needs? Maybe, but instinct said otherwise. Especially when Blaze, the most highly trained canine she had ever seen, continued to stare unblinking at the door like an invisible monster lurked just beyond it. Determined to find answers, Olivia cross-referenced Mason's recent orders with Naomi's monitor logs, mapping every medication change to her vital signs. Her stomach twisted as the pattern emerged, undeniable and terrifying. Every time Mason adjusted Naomi's IV or altered her meds, her vitals dipped dangerously low within an hour. Blood pressure would plummet, oxygen saturation would drop, Her heart rate would slow to alarming levels. When other attending physicians made adjustments, Naomi stabilized. When Mason intervened, she deteriorated. It wasn't a fluke. It wasn't bad luck. It was sabotage disguised as care. Olivia pushed back from the nurse's desk, heart hammering against her ribs. She needed evidence, concrete proof before sounding an alarm that would ripple across the entire hospital. The security cameras, of course. The ICU was under constant surveillance. All rooms monitored 24/7 to ensure patient safety and accountability. She swiped her badge across the terminal, accessing Naomi's room feed archive. The screen flickered to life, showing grainy footage of the past 2 nights. Nurses moving through the room, Daniel visiting during off hours, even Blaze's restless pacing at Naomi's bedside. She fast-forwarded to the timestamps correlating with Mason's chart entries where he had supposedly adjusted medications. Blank. The feed is cut to static every time. Not just a glitch, a full blackout lasting exactly 15 minutes each time Mason entered Naomi's room. Olivia's mouth went dry. Someone had tampered with the feed, selectively wiping footage during critical moments. That wasn't an accident. That was premeditated access, or someone who had compromised that access could do it. Her hands flew over the keyboard, running audit logs. Sure enough, the security system's authentication history showed repeated remote accesses initiated from Dr. Mason's ID badge. Always 10 minutes before he entered Naomi's room. Always from one of the isolated ICU access terminals that required no biometric confirmation. Just a badge swipe and a password. Olivia's chest tightened painfully. This wasn't just negligence. It was deliberate, calculated, and deeply embedded. Meanwhile, inside Naomi's room, Blaze's ears twitched. His nose lifted slightly, nostrils flaring as the faintest whiff of that now familiar chemical thread floated under the door. Daniel caught the shift immediately. His hand moved from resting casually against his gun to resting purposefully atop it. A quiet signal passed between man and dog, a communication honed over countless deployments, countless close calls. Be ready. The door creaked open, and Dr. Mason stepped inside, carrying a tablet in one hand and a neutral smile stretched thinly across his lips. Just checking on her progress, he said easily, his voice smooth, too smooth. Blaze didn't move, but a deep rumble started low in his throat, vibrating through the silent war brewing above her head. You're stable for now, Daniel said evenly, not relaxing his posture. You planning to change anything? Mason's smile tightened imperceptibly. Routine evaluation, he said, tapping a few keys on the tablet. Daniel noticed he didn't actually approach Naomi's bedside. Instead, Mason hovered by the IV stand, glancing only once at the vent on the wall. Blaze's growl grew louder. Mason hesitated, then adjusted the drip rate too slightly for a casual observer to catch. But Daniel wasn't casual, and neither was Blaze. In the hallway, Olivia watched through the observation window, her pulse thundering in her ears. She grabbed her cell phone, thumb flying across the screen as she summoned hospital security and texted Daniel the simple message. Don't let him touch her again, cameras compromised, orders wrong, he's dangerous. Inside the room, Daniel's phone buzzed. He slid it from his pocket, flicked his eyes down once, then back up at Mason. His entire body stiffened. Actually, Daniel said, voice low and lethal, I think it's best if you step away from her. Now. Mason's hand hovered over the IV line. For a split second, his mask slipped. A flash of something raw and ugly twisted across his face. Hatred, recognition, threat. Mason withdrew his hand slowly, carefully. I understand, he said. I'll make a note in her file for the next shift. He turned, walking out of the room with maddening calm. But Blaze strained at the leash, his instincts screaming that danger wasn't retreating. Outside, Olivia met Daniel at the door, her face pale but determined. He's not who he says he is, she said in a whisper barely louder than the hum of machines. You have to move now before it's too late. As the emergency response plan snapped into place, Blaze stayed pressed to Naomi's side, his entire body humming with readiness. Somewhere deep in the maze of sterile corridors, Dr. Eric Mason, or whoever he truly was already disappearing into the hospital's labyrinth, leaving behind only questions, fear, and the growing certainty that this was only the beginning. The sterile hallway outside Naomi's IC room pulsed with tension. Alarms buzzed faintly in the distance, but inside the ward, time seemed frozen. Olivia Reyes and Daniel Reed exchanged a look charged with silent urgency while Blaze stood poised at Naomi's side, hackles raised. Nostrils flaring, Daniel's fingers tightened around Blaze's leash, feeling the dog's tremors of restrained energy vibrating through the thick nylon. They needed to act, and they needed to act now. The realization hit them at the same time. If Mason knew he had been compromised, he wouldn't waste time covering his tracks. He would bolt. Daniel took a step toward the door just as Blaze lunged forward with shocking strength, yanking the leash from Daniel's hand in a flash of black and tan muscle. "Blaze!" Daniel barked instinctively, but the canine was already gone, a blur racing down the polished corridor. The hospital's night staff turned in surprise as Blaze's nails clicked and echoed against the linoleum floor, a primal warning that something unnatural was unfolding among them. Daniel cursed under his breath and sprinted after him, drawing his badge and flashing it at bewildered nurses who instinctively shrank back against the walls. Ahead of them, Dr. Mason moved swiftly through the maze of hospital corridors, his white coat fluttering behind him like a ghost's shroud. In one hand he clutched a worn black satchel, its weight suspiciously uneven for a simple doctor's bag. He didn't head for the main exit. He knew better. Instead, he veered toward the service elevators at the end of the south wing, the ones staff used to move critical patients discreetly, the ones that bypassed the main security checkpoints. Blaze gained ground with terrifying speed, his paws pounding like gunshots against the floor. As he rounded the last corner, a woman in scrubs stepped into his path, a petite redhead with a hospital badge clipped neatly to her collar, a clipboard pressed tight to her chest. What's going on?" she asked loudly, reaching out as if to block the dog's advance. But Blaze, he dropped low, pivoted sharply, and barreled past her with a force that sent her staggering backward against the wall. Her eyes widened in shock, not from the impact but from the knowledge that her attempt to slow the dog had failed. Daniel wasn't far behind. He caught a flash of the woman's ID badge as he raced by. Erin Maddox, RN. Her face was flushed, her hands trembling, but not with fear. No, Daniel had seen that expression before. During raids gone wrong. During stings that unraveled when insiders tried to cover for the guilty. She wasn't scared. She was complicit. Blaze closed the distance between himself and Mason just as the elevator doors began to slide shut. Mason turned his head slightly, his expression no longer calm and calculated but twisted with pure panic. Blaze leapt, his powerful body slamming into the narrowing gap, forcing the doors open just wide enough for Daniel to jam his shoulder into the breach and pry them apart. The force of it jarred Daniel's entire body, but he barely registered the pain. Blaze lunged into the elevator and clamped his teeth onto the hem of Mason's coat, yanking hard enough to spin the man backward into the elevator wall. Mason dropped the satchel. It hit the floor with a muffled metallic clatter, spilling its contents unlabeled vials, syringes, a small black device that looked ominously like a detonator. For a heartbeat, everything froze. Mason locked eyes with Daniel, hatred and desperation battling for dominance in his expression. Then he lunged for the bag. "Freeze!" Daniel roared, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. Blaze snarled, lips peeled back in a feral snarl, muscles coiled to strike again if necessary. Mason hesitated, then raised his hands slowly, his breathing ragged. Hospital security swarmed the hallway moments later, summoned by Olivia's urgent calls. Daniel holstered his weapon only long enough to grab a pair of flex cuffs from his belt and restrain Mason's wrists behind his back with brutal efficiency. "You're not going anywhere," Daniel growled, tightening the plastic bands until Mason winced. Two guards retrieved the satchel, their faces hardening as they took inventory. Olivia arrived seconds later, skidding to a halt beside Daniel, her face pale but determined. "We need to confirm his ID right now," she said, already pulling out her mobile terminal to access hospital records. One of the guards patted Mason down, finding his wallet tucked deep into the inner pocket of his scrubs. He tossed it to Olivia, who flipped it open and scanned the hospital-issued ID card. Her eyes narrowed instantly. "Eric Mason, ICU attending," the card read, complete with an official seal and barcode. It looked legitimate, almost too legitimate. Olivia tapped into the employee database, cross-referencing Mason's ID number. Her breath caught in her throat when the system flashed back a red notification. Employee status: terminated. Deceased. Date of death: 2 months ago. She looked up sharply. This ID belongs to Dr. Mason, she said, her voice cold, but the real Mason died 2 months ago in a car accident on I-95. Body identified by dental records. This man, she jabbed a finger at the restrained imposter, isn't him. Murmurs rippled through the gathered hospital staff. Daniel's gut twisted with rage and vindication. Blaze remained tense at his side, muscles quivering, his gaze never leaving Mason's slumped figure. Get him into holding, Daniel barked to the nearest security team leader, and lock down the south wing. Nobody leaves without clearance. As Mason was dragged away, Olivia crouched to examine the contents of the satchel more closely, her face darkening with each discovery. This isn't just sabotage, she muttered under her breath. This is bioterrorism. Daniel exchanged a glance with Blaze. They had been right to trust the dog's instincts. But the realization brought no comfort, only a grim understanding that the fight to protect Naomi, to expose the network threatening them, was only just beginning, and Blaze, the black and tan shadow who had refused to give up, would be at the heart of it all. The emergency lockdown of Briarwood General had turned the once bustling hospital into a tense, controlled maze. Doors sealed, hallways monitored by armed guards, and the atmosphere thick with whispered questions and growing dread. Daniel Reed stood watch near Naomi's ICU room, Blaze sitting alert at his heel, both locked in a state of hyper-awareness, while Olivia Reyes moved rapidly between the security station and the ad hoc command post set up in the empty nurses' lounge, her mind racing ahead even as her fingers flew across her tablet. The discovery that the man calling himself Dr. Mason was an imposter had shifted everything, but the true scale of the threat was still hidden, just out of reach, and Olivia knew instinctively they were only scratching the surface. Blaze's nose twitched suddenly, cutting through the fog of tension, his powerful nostrils flaring toward the compact refrigerator tucked discreetly into the far corner of the ICU room, the kind normally used to store temperature-sensitive medications. Daniel noticed immediately, his eyes narrowing as Blaze stood, ears pinned, body angled toward the fridge like a guided missile about to launch. Without waiting for a command, Blaze advanced, moving with the deliberate precision only years of tactical training could produce. And when he reached the unit, he circled it once, twice, his tail rigid, his muscles bunching under his glossy coat, before sitting abruptly, issuing a short, sharp bark, the unmistakable K9 signal for target located. Daniel's heart kicked against his ribs, and he stepped forward, unholstering his flashlight, shining the beam down around the base of the fridge where Blaze's intense gaze was locked. Olivia entered just behind him, noting the dog's alert stance, understanding immediately that whatever Blaze had found wasn't routine. Daniel grasped the fridge handle and tugged it open cautiously, half expecting an explosion, half hoping for a false alarm. But what spilled into the beam of his flashlight was far worse than he had imagined. Rows of neatly stacked vials, some labeled with common medical tags, but at the very back, hidden beneath a false-M tray, were 3 vials with no markings at all, only a small biohazard symbol barely visible against the glass. Olivia inhaled sharply, donning gloves before carefully extracting the hidden vials, her hands steady despite the icy wave of horror washing through her. She held one up to the light, watching the viscous, faintly iridescent liquid cling to the sides of the glass like oil on water. This wasn't medication meant for healing. This was engineered, weaponized, alive in a way that made her skin crawl. A quick scan of the hospital database yielded no matches for the vial barcode, and deeper analysis suggested something even more chilling. Recombinant DNA markers, sequences designed to splice themselves into living tissue, altering it fundamentally, irreversibly. Daniel exhaled a low curse under his breath, while Blaze growled softly, the sound vibrating up through the stillness like a warning siren only those tuned to danger could hear. Olivia tapped into Naomi's recent blood work, scrolling through lab results, and found another red flag buried under normal panels. A protein spike that didn't fit any known human pathology, one that mimicked natural immune response. Calling up emergency protocols, she ordered a fresh blood draw, rushing the sample to the hospital's emergency pathology lab under full contamination precautions. In the lab under sterile white lights, Olivia and a small team of trusted technicians processed Naomi's blood, separating plasma from cells, isolating foreign contaminants. Within 20 minutes, they had their answer. A synthetic toxin molecularly engineered, tailored to disrupt cellular respiration, cause organ failure, mimic sepsis, and trigger cascading immune collapse, but carefully balanced in such a way that it would look, superficially, like a tragic medical complication. Olivia's knuckles whitened around the edge of the lab bench as she stared at the molecular readout, each new data point confirming what she had feared. Naomi had not been a random casualty. She had been deliberately poisoned, systematically weakened over time by someone who knew exactly how to bury their crime under layers of plausible deniability. Daniel arrived at the lab just as Olivia finished compiling the preliminary report, Blaze trotting beside him, his eyes never leaving Naomi's blood sample. The two exchanged a grim look, communication flowing effortlessly without words. "This is bigger than one rogue doctor," Olivia said finally, her voice low but steady. "This was planned, coordinated, precise. Whoever did this had access to classified bioengineering resources, government grad or higher." Daniel nodded grimly, absorbing the implications, the pieces falling into place like a deadly puzzle. The targeted attack at Westbridge International, the chemical markers Blaze had identified, the fabricated identity of Dr. Mason. Blaze shifted his stance slightly, nose twitching again, muscles tensing in a way Daniel recognized immediately. There was still more hidden in this hospital, more threats tucked away in plain sight, and they didn't have the luxury of waiting for the next move to be made against them. Olivia pulled up the hospital's pharmaceutical delivery records, scanning for any anomalies in supply chain management over the past 2 months. Her eyes scanning columns of data at inhuman speed. Patterns began to emerge, subtle but undeniable shipments arriving late at night without proper documentation, cold storage deliveries bypassing standard intake procedures, signatures from non-existent employees. Meanwhile, Naomi's vitals continued to hold steady, a fragile beacon of hope in a night fast descending into chaos. Blaze settled briefly at the foot of her bed, but his ears remained pricked, his gaze sweeping the room ceaselessly, the instincts of a guardian angel forged in fire, refusing to let him rest. Daniel squeezed Olivia's shoulder gently, grounding her, reminding both of them that the most important battle hadn't even begun yet. Somewhere in this hospital, among the maze of corridors and locked rooms and frightened staff, the architects of Naomi's poisoning were still moving, still working, still hunting for a way to finish what they had started. And Blaze, loyal and unyielding, would not let them succeed. The realization hit like a blade sliding between ribs, silent and devastating. Standing in the pathology lab, surrounded by cold white lights and the sharp scent of disinfectant, Daniel Reed and Olivia Reyes stared down at the damning evidence before them, and both understood in the marrow of their bones that this wasn't merely an isolated infiltration. It was systemic, orchestrated, rooted deeply within the hospital's very security. Blaze shifted restlessly at Daniel's side, his amber eyes scanning every movement beyond the lab's glass walls as if he too felt the invisible web tightening around them. Olivia's tablet buzzed sharply in her hand, a priority alert flashing across the screen. A security override had been initiated at the hospital's central command post, granting full access to restricted areas, bypassing every layer of clearance they had so painstakingly secured since Mason's exposure. Daniel moved instantly, hand dropping to rest on Blaze's harness, eyes narrowing as adrenaline sharpened his focus. "Who authorized that override?" he demanded, voice a low growl barely concealing the surge of rage building beneath his calm exterior. Olivia typed furiously, pulling up the access logs, her fingers freezing mid-motion when the authorizing code appeared. Cross, Edwin L., Lieutenant Colonel, Head of Hospital Security. The name hung in the sterile air like a toxin, poisoning everything it touched. Daniel remembered Cross well, a man whose military bearing and calm demeanor had earned him respect and deference throughout Briarwood General. He had been everywhere during Naomi's admittance, coordinating emergency response, giving reassuring interviews to the press, positioning himself as the bastion of order amid chaos. And now, seeing his name linked to the override, Daniel felt the bottom fall out of his stomach, understanding that the Fox hadn't merely infiltrated the henhouse, he had been running it all along. Blaze let out a low, rumbling growl, his hackles rising, nose twitching sharply toward the door leading into the secured corridor. Olivia's eyes widened slightly, her mind snapping back to the moment Naomi was wheeled into ICU, unconscious and bleeding out. Cross standing close by, too close, issuing orders to divert security footage, reroute patrols, under the guise of patient privacy. Everything that had seemed like careful, necessary crisis management now reeked of careful, deliberate orchestration. Daniel clenched his fists, forcing his breathing steady, forcing himself to think like the soldier he had once been. If Cross had access to every security protocol, he could have planted evidence, erased footage, manipulated the flow of information to suit his agenda, and worse. If he was still moving freely within the hospital under the authority of his badge and his uniform, he could strike again at any time with lethal precision. Blaze pulled at the harness, not frantically but insistently, his body language precise, deliberate. Daniel understood immediately. Blaze wanted him to follow, to track, to hunt. They couldn't afford to wait for backup, couldn't afford to let Cross slip through their fingers the way Mason had almost done. Without another word, Daniel nodded once to Olivia, who returned a grim nod of her own and began alerting the small cadre of trustworthy staff they had left. Daniel and Blaze moved swiftly into the corridor, the hospital's fluorescent lights casting harsh reflections on the polished floors, every shadow stretching long and suspicious in the corners of Daniel's vision. Blaze led the way, nose low, muscles tight, tracing the faint chemical scent that still clung to the sterile air. The same scent he had detected at the airport, the same scent that had preceded the gunfire, the betrayal, the near. At a blind intersection near the sub-level elevators, Blaze stopped cold. His body stiffened, ears erect, and he let out a sharp bark, an alert signal clear and urgent. Daniel froze, scanning the intersection, his instincts prickling just a heartbeat before a figure stepped out of the dimly lit hallway to the right. Cross, the lieutenant colonel's uniform was immaculate, his posture relaxed, but his eyes betrayed him cold, calculating, assessing. In his right hand, partially obscured by the sleeve of his uniform, Daniel spotted the glint of a compact sidearm. Cross smiled thinly, without humor, and Daniel understood then that the man standing before him had no intention of surrendering quietly. "You're making a mistake, Officer Reed," Cross said evenly, his voice carrying the kind of authority that could compel obedience under normal circumstances. "You don't understand what you're stumbling into." Daniel didn't lower his weapon, didn't even blink. Blaze's growl deepened, reverberating through the corridor like the promise of violence barely leashed. "I understand enough," Daniel said flatly, his finger tightening slightly on the trigger. "You were there at Westbridge, weren't you? You were part of the setup." Cross's smile faltered for the first time, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. Blaze barked again, sharp and sure, the same bark he had given at the airport terminal moments before the ambush began. Daniel's breath caught in his throat, a knot of fury tightening his chest. Blaze remembered Cross's scent, his presence, by sheer loyalty. "You almost killed her," Daniel said, voice low and deadly. "And now you're going to answer for it." Cross's response was a sneer, a tightening of his grip on the concealed weapon at his hip, and Daniel saw the decision flash across the man's face. He wasn't going to talk, he wasn't going to negotiate, he was going to run or fight, or both. Blaze crouched slightly, muscles rippling under his dark coat, ready to spring at Daniel's signal, the air between them charged with a tension so thick it was almost tangible. Olivia's voice crackled over Daniel's earpiece, breathless with urgency. "Daniel, Cross's access logs, he's been using sub-basement tunnels, maintenance routes. He has another exit planned." Daniel barely had time to acknowledge before Cross moved, fast and lethal, pivoting toward the emergency stairwell just beyond the corridor bend, his coat flaring behind him like a dark flag of betrayal. Blaze surged forward without hesitation, Daniel racing after him, the echoes of boots and claws hammering against the hollow walls of Briarwood General as the real hunt finally began. The thunderous echoes of Daniel's boots and Blaze's claws reverberated down the concrete stairwell as they chased after Cross, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering like a dying heartbeat, casting strobes of blinding white and oppressive shadow that made every corner feel like a potential ambush. Daniel's breath came harsh and fast, his body operating on pure adrenaline as he rounded the landing just in time to see Cross slipping through the heavy door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Blaze snarled, a low, feral sound vibrating from deep within his chest as he lunged ahead. Muscles coiled for action. Daniel followed, gun drawn, heart pounding in his ears louder than the shrieking alarms that suddenly erupted through the hospital's PA system. The world pitched violently as every light in the ICU and surrounding corridors blinked once, twice, then died completely, plunging the entire hospital into darkness so thick it seemed to have weight. Daniel cursed under his breath, slamming to a halt just inside the sub-basement door, instincts roaring at him that this wasn't an accident. Somewhere in the depths of the hospital, Cross had triggered a deliberate blackout. Car surveillance, disabling electronic locks, cutting off any chance of remote backup. Blaze stayed glued to Daniel's side, barely a whisper of movement betraying his vigilance. The black and tan outline of his body blending seamlessly with the shadows, as if he were part of them. Emergency backup lights flickered weakly to life along the floorboards, casting the corridors in a dim, blood-red glow, just enough to turn every face, every movement into a distorted nightmare. Daniel's earpiece crackled with frantic voices. Security officers trapped behind locked doors, ICU staff shouting for help as critical life support systems stalled and sputtered in the chaos. Daniel felt a cold stone settle in his gut as he realized that the blackout wasn't just cover for Cross's escape. It was a full-scale diversion, a calculated move designed to sow panic and buy precious time for something far worse. Somewhere upstairs, Naomi Brooks lay vulnerable and exposed, and Daniel knew with sudden, visceral certainty that whatever came next, she was still the real target. Meanwhile, in the darkness of ICU Room 4, Naomi stirred. Her senses returned slowly, sluggishly at first, sound coming before sight, the shrill alarms merging with the panicked voices into a disorienting hum. She blinked against the oppressive blackness, feeling the oppressive weight of medical equipment no longer functioning around her, the sticky pull of IV lines taped to her arms, the roughness of the hospital gown against her skin. Her mind, however, cut through the haze with surgical clarity. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Not just the power outage, but the sense of purpose in the chaos, the wrongness in the air. Memories flashed behind her closed eyes, the firefight at Westbridge, the sharp pain blooming in her side as she went down, the masked figure standing over her, the coldness of betrayal so deep it stole her breath even more than the blood loss had. She remembered Blaze's bark, sharp and furious, remembered Daniel shouting her name, and then darkness. Now, instinct screamed at her to stay still. Carefully, Naomi controlled her breathing, forcing her chest to rise and fall in shallow, even patterns. Feigning unconsciousness with the practiced discipline drilled into her through years of undercover operations. She kept her eyelids slack, her muscles limp, even as every fiber of her being tensed in readiness. Listening, waiting. Footsteps creaked across the polished tile outside her door, slow, deliberate. Not the rushed, chaotic scramble of nurses trying to save patients, but the measured tread of someone hunting. The door to her room opened with a soft, almost tender squeak, and she smelled it before she heard it. The faint, acrid tang of the same chemical residue Blaze had warned them about, the same poison that had laced the air at the airport, the same stench of death disguised as medicine. A shadow slipped into the room, careful and methodical. A figure cloaked in scrubs but moving with a predator's stealth, not a healer's urgency. Naomi kept her body still, only her mind racing ahead, mapping the room, counting the steps between her and the small crash cart positioned against the far wall where she had seen a pair of heavy surgical scissors earlier that day, during one of her brief periods of semi-consciousness. The intruder approached the bed, paused, adjusted something near the IV drip, perhaps inserting a syringe, perhaps altering the flow rate to deliver a final, fatal dose while the hospital's systems were crippled and unmonitored. Naomi listened to the rhythmic squeeze of the manual respirator someone had hastily hooked her up to after the power went out, timed her breathing to it, let her body sag further into the mattress as the figure leaned closer. So close she could feel the slight disturbance in the air around her face. She caught the faintest whisper of movement-gloved fingers reaching for her neck, perhaps to check her pulse, perhaps to administer a killing blow. And then, with a precision born of desperation and rage, Naomi moved. Her hand shot out, seizing the figure's wrist in a vice-like grip, twisting hard enough to wrench a muffled grunt from the shadowed assailant. At the same instant, her free hand groped toward the edge of the bed, found the cold metal of the IV pole, and swung it in a brutal arc toward the attacker's head. The blow connected with a sickening crack, sending the figure staggering backward, crashing into the equipment stand by the window with a clatter that shattered the oppressive stillness of the ICU. Naomi rolled off the bed, landing heavily on her injured side by pushing through the pain, adrenaline surging like wildfire through her battered body. Across the room, the attacker scrambled upright, one hand beneath the loose scrub top for a weapon. Naomi saw the glint of steel just as Blaze's bark exploded from the corridor outside, a thunderclap of fury and recognition that sent a bolt of hope straight through her chest. She pivoted, snatched the surgical scissors from the crash cart and hurled them in one smooth motion honed by countless hours of tactical training. The scissors spun through the air, striking the intruder's hand with enough force to knock the weapon loose, sending it skittering across the floor. But Naomi didn't stop to celebrate. She staggered toward the door as Blaze and Daniel burst into the ICU wing. Blaze immediately, locking onto the intruder with a snarl that shook the walls, Daniel's weapon sweeping the room, his eyes locking onto Naomi's battered but standing form with a mix of relief and grim admiration. The storm had broken inside Briarwood General, and now there was no turning back. The chaos inside Briarwood General Hospital reached a fever pitch, alarms blaring uselessly in the dead hallways, backup generators coughing to life and barely sustaining critical systems as Daniel Reed, Naomi Brooks, Blaze, and Olivia regrouped in the darkened ICU, every nerve on edge, every shadow potentially hiding another enemy. Naomi leaned heavily against the crash cart, blood seeping sluggishly from reopened wounds, but her eyes were sharp, defiant. Daniel offered her a grim nod. Blaze pressed briefly against Naomi's side as if reassuring himself she was real, then turned, his body snapping back into full alert mode, nose twitching, ears swiveling towards some unseen thread of scent cutting through the hospital's scorched, chemical-tanked air. Olivia tapped furiously on her tablet, rerouting emergency protocols, flagging anomalies in the hospital's floor plans that should not have existed, gaps in architectural blueprints, unsuccessful sub-basements that were never listed in public records. It was Blaze who led them, paws pounding softly against the linoleum as he tracked the impossible, following a trail only he could sense, deeper and deeper into the bowels of Briarwood, past abandoned surgical theaters, rusted decontamination chambers, through a crumbling service tunnel hidden behind a fake maintenance door in the East Wing. They descended into the darkness, Daniel moving point with his weapon raised, Olivia close behind, Naomi pushing forward despite her injuries, Blaze moving like a shadow given form, and it was there, 2 stories below the lowest mapped floor, that they found the forgotten door, heavy, steel-enforced, secured with a biometric scanner that Olivia bypassed with a deft series of commands, jacked directly into the hospital's emergency override system. The door creaked open, releasing a stale, metallic stench thick with antiseptic and something fouler, something wrong. Blaze sneezed once, shook his head violently, but surged forward, leading the team into a cavernous underground facility that stretched far beyond the hospital's footprint. Harsh fluorescent lights flickered overhead, illuminating rows upon rows of industrial freezers, containment pods, and makeshift laboratories cobbled together with stolen medical equipment. Olivia's hand flew to her mouth as she scanned the room, recognizing pieces of stolen technology, CDC-grade containment units, illegally modified centrifuges, an entire factory hidden beneath the hospital's foundations, dedicated not to healing but to weaponizing biological material, creating agents of disease designed not for treatment but for destruction. Daniel swept the room methodically, heart pounding, finding crates stamped with fake pharmaceutical company logos, hastily scrawled manifestos listing coded references to compounds he didn't recognize. In one corner, a workstation sat abandoned mid-ass, a centrifuge still spinning, vials marked only by strange symbols cooling inside a blasted refrigerator. Naomi steadied herself against the wall, her gut churning with a sick, hollow rage, understanding now the scale of what they had stumbled into. Not a simple betrayal, not a rogue operation, but a node in something vast, something that reached beyond Briarwood General, beyond Westbridge, perhaps beyond national borders entirely. Blaze moved to a side alcove, barking sharply once, drawing their attention to a locked security cabinet bolted to the wall. Olivia hacked it open within minutes, revealing stacks of encrypted hard drives, stacks of documents, shipments, payment records, enough evidence to expose a conspiracy that could shatter governments. But just as hope began to flicker, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the hallway behind them, and Dr. Amy Lou burst into view. Her face flushed, eyes wide with feigned innocence. "There you are," she gasped, clutching a medical bag to her chest. "I was looking for you. Security's collapsing. We have to move Naomi now." Daniel immediately stiffened. Blaze growled low in his throat. Naomi narrowed her eyes despite the spinning in her head. Something in Amy's voice rang false, too rehearsed, too desperate. Olivia frowned, stepping slightly in front of Naomi, shielding her instinctively. "How did you know we were down here?" she asked quietly, every syllable laced with suspicion. Amy faltered, just for a fraction of a second, but it was enough. Blaze surged forward with a snarl, teeth flashing in the dim light, and Amy flinched back instinctively, the medical bag slipping from her grasp, hitting the floor with a heavy metallic thunk that echoed obscenely loud in the silent chamber. The bag split open on impact, spilling its contents across the cracked tiles. Hypodermic syringes pre-filled with a viscous, dark fluid. Tiny vials labeled with the same biohazard symbols they had found earlier. A portable data drive bearing the same encryption keys Olivia had cracked upstairs. The silence shattered as understanding crashed down on the group like a physical blow. "You're with them," Daniel said, voice low and vibrating with fury. "You've been covering for them this whole time." Amy's expression twisted, the mask of innocence falling away to reveal something harder, colder, calculating. "You don't understand," she hissed, stepping back toward the exit. "It's bigger than you, bigger than all of us. You can't stop it." Daniel raised his weapon. Blaze growled. Naomi pushed herself upright with a groan of pain, fire blazing in her dark eyes. Olivia advanced on Amy, tablet flashing as she initiated a full data dump from the compromised drive. For a heartbeat, no one moved, the standoff brittle as glass. And then, somewhere deeper in the facility, a low rumble began to vibrate through the earth. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the low rumble grew louder, dust shaking loose from the corroded pipes above their heads. Daniel grabbed Naomi instinctively, pushing her toward the nearest support beam while Olivia yanked Blaze back from the now-abandoned medical bag. Dr. Amy Lou bolted toward the service tunnels, disappearing into the maze of darkness without a backward glance. Daniel raised his weapon but didn't calculating that chasing her blindly into the labyrinth now would only lead them deeper into a trap. Instead, he turned his attention back to Naomi, seeing the flash of memory ignite behind her eyes. Even as the tremors worsened, Naomi pressed her back against the cold steel beam, panting through the pain, her mind suddenly shoving fragmented images into focus. Mason's face under the harsh lights of the ICU, the fake. It had been a small thing, easy to miss, a simple platinum band on the imposter doctor's finger. But etched into the underside was a symbol she knew far too well. 3 interlocking serpents curled around a burning sword. The insignia of Erebus Initiative, a covert terrorist organization specializing in bioweapon development and deployment. A network so shadowy most intelligence agencies refused to acknowledge its existence publicly. Naomi's breath caught, the pieces clicking together with brutal clarity. Briarwood wasn't just collateral damage. It was ground zero for something much bigger, much deadlier. "We have to get out now," Naomi rasped, her voice raw but urgent. "They're planning to burn the evidence and everyone in it." Daniel didn't hesitate, pulling Naomi's arm over his shoulders to support her weight, signaling Olivia to move. Blaze surged ahead, leading them back through the corridors toward the emergency stairwell. But as they approached the main ICU wing, Blaze suddenly stopped dead, his body going rigid, nose lifted, nostrils flaring violently. Daniel froze, instincts screaming again. Then he smelled it too, a sickly sweet chemical odor riding the recycled air. "Faint? You're flooding the ICU," Olivia gasped, horror dawning in her voice. "They're going to suffocate the patients." Without waiting for orders, Blaze tore away from Daniel's side, sprinting toward the red emergency box mounted on the wall near the locked ICU doors. Daniel cursed, running after him, realizing too late that the fire suppression systems had been hijacked. Reprogrammed to act as gas dispersal units, Blaze skidded to a halt in front of the glass-covered alarm box, teeth bared, muscles coiling, and with a single explosive leap he smashed his powerful jaws against, shattering it in a spray of fragments. The impact triggered the manual override, setting off a shrieking alarm that echoed through the entire hospital, red strobes flashing wildly, emergency ventilation systems roaring to life as they reversed airflow, sucking the contaminated air out of the ICU in a massive whoosh that rattled the window frames and shook the hanging lights. Inside the ICU rooms, patients who had been suffocating moments earlier gasped and coughed, their monitors spiking back into the realm of survival as fresh, clean air flooded the wards. Nurses stumbled into action, ripping down makeshift filters, administering oxygen, dragging portable ventilators into place. Dozens of lives snatched back from the brink by the instincts and training of a dog who refused to abandon his fallen partner. Daniel skidded to a halt beside Blaze, dropping to one knee, grabbing the dog's face in his hands and staring into his fierce golden eyes with something close to awe. "Good boy," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "You saved them. You saved all of them." Naomi staggered into the corridor behind them, Olivia supporting her, both women looking shaken but determined. Blaze wagged his tail once, sharp and purposeful, before immediately turning his head toward the ICU's main nursing station, ears pinned back, body tense again. Something else was wrong. Daniel followed Blaze's line of sight and spotted it instantly, a second wave of gas canisters tucked discreetly inside a medical cart parked near the nurse's console, blinking lights counting down silently toward detonation. Daniel's stomach turned to ice. They had seconds, maybe less, without thinking. He grabbed the nearest fire extinguisher, ripped the safety pin free and hurled it with all his strength across the room. The extinguisher slammed into the cart, knocking it onto its side just as the first canister detonated. A muted whump, followed by a burst of white smoke. The force directed harmlessly into the open hallway, rather than into the ICU rooms where patients lay helpless. Olivia moved instantly, sprinting to disable the remaining devices, fingers flying across the touchscreens built into the canisters, overriding safeties, disarming countdowns one by one with a surgeon's precision while Daniel covered her. Weapon raised, Blaze circling protectively around Naomi's battered form. Somewhere deeper in the hospital, another explosion rocked the foundations. This one fainter, further away, but enough to make ceiling tiles rain down dust and debris. Daniel's radio crackled to life with frantic reports, multiple fires breaking out simultaneously, automated lockdowns failing across critical zones. The hospital was turning into a death trap by design. "We have to find Cross," Naomi said through gritted teeth, wiping blood from her mouth. "He's still trying to—" Daniel nodded grimly, his jaw tightening as he took in the devastation around them. The wounded patients, the overwhelmed staff, the corridors choked with smoke and fear. Blaze pressed against his leg, ready, waiting, unwavering. Naomi's fingers brushed against the torn pocket of her hospital gown and found a small, plastic ID badge she had palmed earlier during her fake unconsciousness. Dr. Mason's temporary visitor pass, abandoned when he fled. Her thumb traced the edge of the card, mind working furiously. "We can use this," she muttered, showing it to Daniel and Olivia. It might still have access to the restricted levels. They would have kept emergency escape routes on a closed system not linked to the main grid. Olivia took the badge, scanning it quickly, her face tightening in frustration. "It's low clearance, but it'll get us into sublevel C, the surgical annex, maintenance shafts beyond that." Daniel exchanged a look with Naomi, then with Blaze, the unspoken agreement passing between them as clear as words. They were not just fighting for survival now. They were taking the fight to the enemy. And Blaze, the dog who had already saved more lives tonight than most men managed in a lifetime, would be leading the charge once again. The corridors of Briarwood General groaned under the strain of destruction as Daniel, Naomi, Olivia, and Blaze pushed deeper toward the surgical annex, the stolen access badge granting them passage through security doors that hissed open on failing hydraulics, the air thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning wiring. Blaze led the way with unwavering focus, his ears swiveling constantly, his nose cutting through the chaos to seek out Cross's fading trail. Naomi's strength was waning, but her resolve burned brighter than ever. Her mind sharp despite the pain lancing through her side. They descended another flight of stairs into the sub-basement, where red emergency lights barely illuminated a series of maintenance tunnels. Blaze sniffed intently at a junction where 3 hallways split in different directions. His body tense with indecision, Daniel glanced at Naomi, who nodded grimly, trusting Blaze's instincts over any map or plan. Blaze chose the middle path, his paws skimming silently over the cracked concrete, Daniel and Olivia flanking Naomi protectively, weapons drawn. Every step measured and deliberate, they moved fast but cautious, knowing every corner could conceal another ambush. Halfway down the tunnel, Blaze suddenly paused, nose wrinkling, muscles tightening Naomi protectively. Blaze had taken to register the warning before a hidden blast door slammed shut behind Blaze, separating him from the team with a deafening clang of reinforced steel slamming into place. The hiss of released gas followed immediately, thin, almost invisible tendrils snaking out from vents embedded in the ceiling. Blaze, Naomi screamed hoarsely, lunging toward the door only to be hauled back by Daniel at the last second as a secondary security mechanism electrified the doorframe. Sparks sizzling along the seams, Blaze barked once, sharp and defiant, then dropped into a low crouch, assessing the situation with the clarity only a trained canine could muster. Naomi's mind raced, remembering every drill, every specialized maneuver she had painstakingly taught Blaze over years of partnership. The gas thickened rapidly, a paralytic agent designed to incapacitate, not kill immediately, but time was running out. Blaze's eyes scanned the cramped room and spotted the manual override lever mounted high near the ceiling. Impossible for a human without tools to reach under normal conditions, but not impossible for a dog who had been taught to adapt. Naomi pressed her palm flat against the window slit, locking eyes with Blaze through the fogging glass. Willing him to remember, she made a subtle hand motion. A signal from their early training days, one that meant improvise, find a way, survive. Blaze snarled low in his throat, then leapt, muscles bunching and releasing like a coiled spring. His jaws clamped around the metal piping of a maintenance ladder bolted to the side wall, his weight wrenching it downward with a screech of tortured metal. Using the momentum, he swung himself higher, back paws scrabbling for purchase, front teeth snapping toward the emergency release lever. He missed once, twice, then, with a furious snap of his head, he caught the lever and yanked. The blast door groaned, shuddered, then jerked upward a few inches before locking halfway open. The gas vented rapidly outward as pressure equalized. Daniel and Olivia surged forward, dragging the heavy door the rest of the way open. Naomi stumbled through the gap, coughing violently but ignoring the burning in her lungs, dropping to her knees beside Blaze, who stood shaky but alive, tongue lolling, his chest heaving from exertion but his tail thumping once against the floor in triumph. "You're a damn miracle," Naomi whispered, pressing her forehead briefly to his. Relief so fierce it brought tears to her eyes before she shoved herself upright, grim determination hardening her features again. Daniel clapped Blaze's flank as Olivia scanned the tunnel ahead, urgency pounding through their veins. No time to celebrate, not yet. They pressed onward, following the faint trail of cross deeper into the labyrinthine maintenance system, until finally they found a rusted stairwell leading back toward the administrative wings, where the federal task force was scheduled to debrief survivors and begin collecting formal testimony. Daniel's radio crackled with updates: FBI teams moving in, medical evac units prepping critical patients, the hospital slowly being reclaimed inch by bloody inch. Hours later, after Blaze was cleared by emergency veterinary medics and Naomi's wounds were hastily stabilized, the small team was ushered toward a temporary courtroom set up in the administrative auditorium. The atmosphere inside was tense, dozens of federal agents milling about, security tighter than a drum. Naomi stood near the podium, Blaze sitting alert at her side, Daniel and Olivia flanking her, FBI Director Reynolds himself waiting behind the makeshift dais. Just as Naomi stepped forward to deliver her statement, a flicker of movement caught Blaze's eye from the upper balcony. A figure shifting wrong, moving with purpose not aligned to the controlled chaos of law enforcement protocol. Blaze's ears flattened, nostrils flaring, heart pounding, his instincts screaming danger. Without hesitation, Blaze sprang into motion, hurtling toward Naomi as a flash of silver glinted high above, a suppressed pistol emerging from beneath a decoy maintenance worker's jacket. The first shot cracked through the auditorium like a whip, aimed squarely at Naomi's heart. Blaze intercepted it mid-hat, his powerful body colliding with Naomi's side, driving her down hard behind the heavy wooden stand, the bullet grazing his flank but missing vital organs by inches. Blaze yelped but twisted mid-air to shield Naomi completely. Daniel was already moving, drawing his weapon and returning fire in a fluid blur of muscle and reflex. FBI agents erupted into action, tackling the shooter before he could fire again, wresting the weapon from his grasp amid a chaotic chorus of shouted commands and screaming witnesses. Naomi lay sprawled on the floor. Blaze sprawled protectively over her, his body vibrating with pain but his gaze locked on her face, checking, assessing, making sure she was still breathing, still alive. She reached up with trembling hands, fingers digging into his fur, whispering broken words of gratitude, rage, loyalty, love. Daniel knelt beside them, his face pale but composed. Olivia stood guard, weapon still raised, scanning the auditorium for secondary threat. Above them, sirens wailed anew, reinforcements storming in from every exit, the web tightening around Briarwood General at last. But deep in the shadows of the sublevels, something else stirred, something that had not yet revealed its hand, something that had been waiting for this exact moment to make its final move. The aftermath of the attempted assassination at Briarwood General sent shockwaves through every level of federal command. The immediate investigation, spearheaded by Director Reynolds himself, unearthed a staggering network of corruption and conspiracy. Piece by piece, agents pieced together the trail left behind by the impostor Dr. Mason, Cross, Amy Lou, and countless others embedded across institutions once considered untouchable. Crypted files seized from the hidden labs beneath the hospital, coupled with intercepted communications, exposed a sprawling web of bioweapons trafficking, reaching from Westbridge International Airport to military research facilities, and even deep into pharmaceutical supply chains. The name Erebus Initiative surfaced repeatedly, a clandestine syndicate specializing in the development, transport, and sale of genetically engineered pathogens designed to destabilize nations without firing a single bullet. In the weeks following the takedown at Briarwood, Naomi Brooks became a central figure in the FBI's Special Task Force briefings. Her first-hand knowledge of the inner workings of Erebus, combined with Blaze's unrivaled ability to detect the chemical signatures of the modified agents, turned them into the most valuable assets the Bureau had ever encountered. Naomi sat across from Director Reynolds in a secure conference room inside Quantico, Blaze lying obediently at her feet. The director's expression was unreadable as he slid a black folder across the table to her, embossed with a golden eagle and the words, Operation Spectre. "You understand what this means?" Reynolds said quietly, his voice stripped of the usual bureaucratic polish. "This isn't just another task force, Agent Brooks. This is deep black off books, no public acknowledgement, no safety net. You and Blaze would be operating as a single unit, counterintelligence, counter-bio-ops, infiltration if necessary." Naomi's fingers hovered over the folder, feeling the weight of the decision before she even opened it. Blaze lifted his head slightly. Sensing the gravity in the room, Naomi exchanged a glance with Daniel Reed, seated nearby, his face lined with pride and worry in equal measure. Olivia Reyes nodded once, a subtle gesture of encouragement. Naomi smiled faintly, worn but unbroken. She had been through hell, been betrayed by those she trusted, nearly killed more times than she could count. But through it all, Blaze had never wavered, never hesitated, never abandoned her. Together they had survived, together they had uncovered the truth, and together they would face whatever came next. "I'm in," Naomi said simply, sliding the folder back across the table unopened. Blaze thumped his tail once against the floor in silent agreement. Reynolds' lips twitched into a rare smile. "Good. You'll be the first human canine partnership officially embedded into national counterintelligence operations. Full clearance, field command authorization, codename Shadowlance." The official ceremony was held in private, deep within the classified annex at Quantico. No cameras, no press, Only a handful of select agents and military liaisons bore witness as Naomi Brooks received the Department of Defense's Distinguished Service Medal for extraordinary valor under fire. And Blaze, standing proud and stoic beside her, was awarded the first ever Valor Cross for K9 operations, his new tactical harness gleaming under the soft light, emblazoned with the insignia of their new unit. As Naomi pinned the medal onto Blaze's harness herself, laughter and applause echoing softly through the room, she leaned down and whispered into his ear, "We're not done yet, partner, not even close." Outside the secure compound, the world spun on, blissfully unaware of how close it had come to catastrophe. News outlets reported on the Briarwood fire as a tragic accident. Officials cited isolated rogue element. For the security breaches at Westbridge, sanitized versions of the truth crafted carefully to prevent mass panic. But Naomi and Blaze knew better. They had seen the rot from the inside, fought it with teeth and claws and sheer stubborn willpower, and they understood that Erebus had not been dismantled completely, merely wounded. Late one evening, Naomi stood alone on the rooftop of the safe house assigned to them, the stars obscured by thin clouds, the air crisp with the scent of distant rain. Blaze sat at her side, his golden eyes reflecting the faint glow of the city lights. She held a thin dossier in her hands, newly delivered by a trusted handler. Inside were fresh intel reports, movements of known Erebus operatives, whispers of new cells forming in South America, Africa, Eastern Europe. The fight wasn't over. It was only changing shape. Naomi crouched beside Blaze, running her fingers through the thick ruff of fur at his neck, feeling the solid, steady beat of his pulse. Her heart ached with the knowledge of the battles still to come, the sacrifices they would inevitably be asked to make. But she felt no fear, only resolve. "You smell that?" she murmured, half to herself, half to him. Blaze sniffed the air, ears pricking forward, tail giving a single determined thump. "Change," Naomi said, smiling grimly, "and we're going to be right there when it happens." In the distance, sirens wailed faintly, a reminder that chaos was never far away, that darkness never truly slept. Naomi rose to her feet, Blaze rising with her, and together they turned toward the stairwell leading back into the heart of their new life, their new war. As the door swung shut behind them, the night swallowed their silhouettes, and somewhere beyond the horizon, another battle stirred. But Naomi Brooks and Blaze, bonded by blood, by trust, by the unbreakable promise of loyalty forged in the fires of betrayal, were ready. Because in a world where enemies wore friendly faces and threats whispered through sterile hallways, it wasn't strength alone that would decide the future. It was who had the courage to face the unknown. Side by side, nose to the wind, heart steady, teeth bared against the coming storm. And they were just getting started. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What moment hit you the hardest? Where are you tuning in from today? Drop a comment below and let's talk about it. Your voice helps shape where we take this journey next.